Hangout. Today we were supposed to be connected to Zurich, but unfortunately they don't have the equipment to live stream there, so we may be plugging back into them later. So just to kick things off, we're starting out with London, and hopefully a little later Casey and Meher Roy and the Switzerland Bitcoin Meetup will be joining us from Zurich. But you all know me. I'm Preston Byrne. Chris Ellis, David Bovell, Ksenia Sarova, and a couple of others have dialed in. And today we're going to be talking about sort of organizational structures and how you can use automation on a distributed network to either smooth those transactions or render them more transparent or something else. We haven't actually really planned really what we're going to say, but that's a good thing. So I say we just throw it open, and Chris, I'll let you guys in London take it from here.
Great, thanks very much, Preston. Yeah, it's Chris from London here at the Barclays Accelerator as our normal venue, and we're joined here today by a group of great budding finance people and people that are also a developer as well, and David Bovell. And so, yeah, we're just going to be talking about, I think what we wanted to talk about today was distributed autonomous organizations, and we also wanted to talk about what it would take to produce a minimum viable distributed autonomous organization. David, your thoughts?
That's me. Well, I've been dreaming about easy to set up bank accounts. That's kind of what I've been interested in for a while, from the point of view of, let's say, the voluntary association that I set up for our housing group. The amount of pain and effort it is to set up that organization, which is just a voluntary association, open up the bank account, and then, even more important, get the treasurer and get the accounts audited, and to be able to trust that process. Because what happens is, I guess, I know from the council, from Islington Council's point of view, it's in London, these organisations pop up and then they go dormant for 2-3 years and then they pop up again. They're very unreliable. Sometimes people run away with the money, often not sort of deliberately. They do things like they just fail to fill in their forms or account for things. They get some grants and then they kind of, it's all very unstable and unsure. And then organising the meetings is also quite a headache. And one of the main things that we do in our voluntary association is we run a blog. And I set that blog up, for instance, about 5-6 years ago. I did quite a lot, and then I got busy with other stuff, so I didn't put the time and effort in, and currently it's down and no one else is maintaining it. It's not run, and a lot of hyperlocal blogs and have that problem, that instability. So I was thinking, what if we could set up with a really easy, stable way of funding the hosting and maybe maintenance of these blogs?
Right. So at the moment, if you want a group of you locally want to set up an organisation to look after, the communal gardens, it's quite a rigmarole to get a bank account set up. It takes several months, and also you're left with the onus of someone's got to be in charge of it. They've got the password to the online banking set up, and then if they drift off or they go away somewhere, or even if we can't trust them, we end up with a single point of failure. So I guess the task is can we generate some kind of prototype in the next few weeks where we can show as a proof of concept, we can have a script, piece of code that can generate a Bitcoin wallet of some kind that anyone can then donate to, which can then get the ball rolling. It can buy a domain name, all these kind of automations.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, in my spare time, I've been working on some scripts that will just do all the provisioning of that. So it'll basically buy the domain name. So I found one service that has an API that you can buy domain names through. Another service which gives you the DNS control. In fact, Google have just set up some quite nice scalable DNS hosting thing with the command line tool. Some simple stuff. Another platform as service stuff that will do the actual hosting. I think I'm using DigitalOcean at the moment, so I can script setting up for $5 a month a server for a group that will probably cope for like 40 sites or something like that, 20 to 40 sites. So for small amounts of money, for let's say 10 quid each, what I'd love is like a little mobile or app or something like that, and say, yeah, let's do that down the pub. And we know now that we've collected maybe enough money to basically run this site for 3 years and buy the domain and do it. And now we've got a contract which is easy for other people to come in and take over, and it just kind of runs, and it's a small scale real world problem of sharing something which is largely, most of the transactions or payments are virtual in any case.
Mm-hmm.
Would you envisage a situation where people have effectively direct debit set up to this central thing? Because the obvious issue I see with that is unless there's someone there flogging everyone else to contribute to the central entity, then you find a similar situation where you can have sort of group apathy, and things end up not being done unless you can actually find a way for people to opt in to the chain where it then takes it out of their hands. So you don't need a central figure trying to get people, will you please,
in my experience,
into our...
because I think you're coming from it from the point of view of, if you like, the financial world. Yeah.
Okay.
So from my experience in these settings, when you're talking about 10 quid and a few people for a few years, right? The main problem isn't one of freeloaders, right? And people not putting in their 10 quid. It's just the bureaucratic hassle of doing it.
No, indeed.
So if you make that super, super easy, let's say when we have our community meeting, right, once a year, and there's some drink going, if it's just really easy and people can just press a button on their phone, right, and in fact, you don't need everyone. Generally speaking, if it's a group of, let's say, 50 or 100 people, if 5 or 6 people just say, yeah, we'll do it, it's only a tenner, then that kind of works really well. And then if you're doing something, because there was a lot of energy going into hyperlocal blogs and community storytelling, and they all collapse, you can go out to your supporting. So if you get 2-3% of people and you just reduce the friction of that, I mean, you can talk about pro tips. So the idea of making it very, very easy for people to tip and donate and reducing the friction, it doesn't solve all the problems you're talking about, but it's a good pilot.
It's a similar phenomenon that Wikipedia has, where it doesn't work in theory, but it works in practice. That if you give everyone the ability to contribute to something out there, social objects, often called, that people will, and they like this idea that they contributed to something that's bigger than themselves. So the idea would be that you would probably have these fairly sort of mimetic. We get things like Doge and cats and kittens and things that go viral at the moment. But what else could we get to emerge spontaneously on the web if anyone could just donate to this address, and then spontaneously some institution emerges, and run by anyone who has the care and the willingness to take it.
So it seems like the problem you're really fixing is the difficulty of establishing a bank account to start with.
Right.
Because if in your example, if the payments are sufficiently irregular that it's not a hassle to actually get them from everyone, then that part of it actually isn't a major problem to start with. Yeah. It's still someone who says, okay, let's all put in a tenner, and we could all just reach into our wallets and say, hey, here's a tenner.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll just nip down to the shops and get more staples or whatever it might be. I'll replenish the hobnobs. So.
But it's also, I mean, it's not just the collecting of the money. I mean, I'm thinking also collecting the money. So when people, but one of the main things is the audit trail. So what often happens is, like, we get, as a voluntary association, I think, is it £200 a year, or we can claim, if we do claim, which we often don't claim, towards the running of the voluntary association from the council. Now, the funders will often also fund various small projects you do, a gardening project, or you do something else like that. No one ever reports on this stuff, and that if you have, and who turns up at meetings, the minutes, and all of that, whether it's a real organisation with people turning up or no one turning up at all, no one can monitor. If you have basically a DAO with a virtual bank account and one central KIC, it's a community interested company or something, doing the accounts, every transaction is voted for by people, provably. People who turn up at the meeting is audited provably. The expenditure, all that trail, it takes all the pain away from the people running the social projects, and it really shows some of the benefits of automation in terms of the bureaucracy of running legal entities. It doesn't solve the sort of the freeloader type problem, but those tools are there, and we can start to look at those for areas where, if you like, it's more of the higher stakes financially, if you like.
Cool.
Part of the reason that we actually that we thought of this, as an organizational tool arises from really the very beginning when we kicked this whole thing off. And to this day, none of us actually lives in the same country. So, like organizing data, keeping in touch with each other, we have to use 15 different platforms to do it. Claiming expenses and claiming receipts. It's a pain in the ass, even if it's only one person going to an accountant or doing something like that. And that's a fairly mundane and boring piece. But, thinking in sort of wider terms, the way that people organize themselves and organize their work, I think anyone who's done any software development will know that, most software development is not done in one big building on one floor now. It's done by independent people who are spread out all over the place. And so as people do more and more work, separated from each other, there's going to become a larger coordination problem between them. So the question is, how do you get a really easy way that you can control their actions, which is effectively supervising them, in the sense that that when they're doing something, they're not going to be able, you don't have to watch them. And that's, the idea of a blockchain, one idea of the blockchain, which is interesting. But then to the extent that, who watches the watchman, the guys who are actually running these databases, well, chances are if you've got a couple of copies of the blockchain spread around, they're not going to be able to chuck in some invalid transactions, or they're not going to be able to take anything out for sure without somebody noticing it. So it's a question of how we get, and there's a very good reason for this, I think, commercially, because people find each other over the internet from around the world with common interests, and they may, in most cases now they're not located in the same place. So yeah, from a very micro level like that to something which is really, really much wider, people are coming together for common objectives. In this kind of, I don't want to get Chris started on the sort of global internet monoculture, because he'll just go off and philosophize from now until the cows come home. But huh?
How terrible!
How terrible! God, he might bring up Plato again. Oh no. But yeah, I mean that's kind of where we, at least where I'm approaching the problem from, which is that people do their own shit now, and you've got a lot of capacity, and so there's no need to herd them together, put them in suits, and drop them into a building in order to accomplish a common objective. But how do you then secure that relationship, supervise it, and make it more efficient at the same time? That's another question.
I also have a question, actually, because we've got a couple of people here from the legacy financial system as well. And Joe, you're from UBS. And how much do you guys know already about this technology? Because I feel like we've just kind of airdropped you in on this new planet, and it's like totally different to something you're used to. How much do you guys already know about?
We're learning about it at the moment. Investigating how we can make use of it, how we can become more efficient by using the blockchain technology.
Right. So for like a legacy bank, I guess is it about efficiency and driving down the cost of operation, or do they see it more as like sort of something revolutionary, some new product offering that they can give their customers? Is it mostly back-end efficiencies, or is it front-end kind of sales?
Both, I think.
Yeah.
I think for any guest as well.
Okay.
For any huge incumbent organization, revolution isn't the top of their agenda.
Right.
It's the thin end of the wedge. I mean, to get anything implemented in an organization as large as ours is the work of years, and you have legacy systems, you need to make sure everything talks to each other and whatever else. Are you at the end of Canary Wharf, are you? At the Innovation Lab?
I started doing some work there, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I was down to talk with Alex last week, and it seems like the stuff he's looking at, it's very exploratory at the moment, and probably I think that the most I work in a markets role rather than anything to do with technology. Sorry, I might have railroaded a little bit there.
No, that's interesting. So why does it take such a long time to get anything done in these big institutions? Is it just because they're big, or is it a cultural thing? Because Facebook's big, but it still gets a lot done, and Google's
I think Facebook has 6,000 people or something globally, and we have 60,000 people.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And
also, Google is not the right example here.
I think Google haven't, but we're also we're the result of multiple mergers over years and years and years, and you end up having different systems stuck together and forced to talk to each other and layered on top of it. So getting something to change, particularly in a business where you're moving huge amounts of money and there's a lot of operational risk, nothing is taken lightly because the costs of getting it wrong are enormous.
Right.
So my question is, there's this question that's come up a number of times to do with Ethereum, which is, what is Ethereum and what does it do? And we were thrown in front of the camera for like 2 minutes or 30 seconds, or everyone had to say what Ethereum was. And my answer or my thought on it is it's basically it's Napster for law. So it's basically the sort of moment in history where a piece of technology released in the wild can have that sort of impact on an industry. So if it's true that this technology can have that sort of profound an impact, but not in the music industry, but by banking and finance and accounting and insurance and so forth, and it is also true that, like EMI, but maybe even worse, the banks are that rigid and slow-moving a structure, does that mean they have any chance of actually taking advantage of this technology, and that, in fact, they're doomed to be disintermediated by small startups? Or do you think...
I'm not so sure that they are. I'm not so sure that they are, because so the small start banking, the people who say that like Bitcoin is going to wipe out the banks don't know what banks do, and what banks do is they lend, and that's a business which is related to human relationships, credit checks, determining whether a business is creditworthy, people making assessments as to whether they need credit. It's more complicated than that. I think what the blockchain really does, and by blockchain here I mean, the idea that a blockchain can be tailored to do something and automate it in a really secure way, in a way which is much faster than the way things are currently done. I think that's the critical thing. The reason that banking is so slow today is because all of these processes that we understand as conventional banking are largely not automatic. If you want to send a cross-border payment to some dinky bank in Southern Illinois, then chances are you're going to have to get some human hands to check it, and it's going to take 3 days for that payment to arrive where you want it to go. If you're going to clear a foreign exchange trade, it's the same thing. You've got different layers of messaging, different types of software, different banks who have implemented that software in different ways, all of whom will need to check and confirm. And it'll take 3 to 14 days after you've entered into the trade, confirmed it, and in order for that trade to actually clear and settle. So the problem is that there are a lot of human beings in that equation. And I think what the promise of blockchains is that they automate process in the way which you can check, and you have very transparent records as to how things are moving around. But also when you put the command in, it checks. It's like, okay, this person, who are they? What permissions do they have? And then what do I spit out when they give a particular instruction to a particular smart contract or particular thing? So this is about the core principle of, if you look at Bitcoin as money, you're not going to think of it like this. I think of it as an automatic clearing and settlement system. The code is designed to address that particular process very specifically, and it does it really well. But if you can code clearing and settlement on a distributed ledger, equally you can code any other process on a distributed ledger, whether it be supervising your back or middle office functions is one thing. But equally you could do something like GitHub, and you could put that in a distributed ledger and save yourself $7.99 a month if it were worth it to do so, because you no longer need them to provide that service for you. So this is about automating stuff that currently requires human beings to check, and doing it without and you can do all this on a server. For example, you could, a lot of payment stuff you could do on Ripple, but for the banks simply don't want to use someone else's servers to run their administration. It's just not something that they're in the mood to do. So, in my experience and in my reckoning, so from a business process perspective, blockchains are really good at taking human beings out of the equation. And that's what makes banks slow, not the fact, when you look at a bank, it's not, a bank is not a unitary, what is Ethereum? What is a bank? Well, it differs from bank to bank.
All right, I'm gonna argue with you here, Preston, which is...
Bring it on.
Which is basically, you said the business of banks was lending, and you talked about the judgment required to be able to do that. banks have largely divested themselves of the local people who used to have those roles, and something like this blockchain technology can basically bring back that kind of role of a local person with a smartphone or what have you, who knows and is in touch with the local businesses of the people.
Hey, Zurich's online. Sorry, we've got Zurich just popping in.
Let them get set up. We'll let them get set up. But carry on, Dave.
So they might require a loan and be able at a cost which is competitive with the centralized cost savings which have been, if you like, rolled out over the last 30 years, which have lost the people embedded in the community. And that's largely also because that role can be taken up by maybe semi-professionals or volunteers who the professionalization is now in the app, if you like, and the safety and the security and the auditing and so forth is automated. But the people now have been reinstated.
I think it's easier just to set up a local bank. If you know what banking looks like in code, and you know that, and you have an open source blockchain design which you can repeat, it suddenly makes it easier. Okay, hey investors, yeah, what? I want to set up the Bank of Hull. So why do you want to do that? Because we need a local bank to serve the local population. Okay, why do you want to do that? Well, I want to do it because local people need local banking. Okay, well, how are you going to do it? We're going to get a lot of infrastructure and servers and this and that and this and that and bop, 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 bop. The investors will turn around and go, okay, you have no idea what you're doing. That's not going to happen. So your startup costs are very high. So blockchains are, rather than looking at it as something where it's going to allow the banks to serve people better, it's going to allow a wider diversity of banking to take place, I think. So you'll be looking at sort of, one thing we think of when we think of blockchains, it's like a return to the guild system. So if you can run Uber on a blockchain, you can have taxi unions in local areas rather than one global Uber thing. You could have the global Uber protocol, the rules which taxi drivers use. And then as you're in one city to the other, you could just plug into the protocol, but the protocol is run by the taxi drivers rather than being run by a sort of rentier out of Silicon Valley who's extracting 20% of every fare. Similarly, if you have a sort of clearing protocol or a bank account protocol or some other series of rules which once you set it up, you say, okay, it's like the bank in a box, right? This is the process. We know how it works. We know that if we do A, B, C, D, and E, we have all of the functions of a bank. Then it's just a question of putting up the gateways and the supervision to make sure that the stuff isn't messed with. So I think on that point, it just makes banking easier, and it makes it easier for everybody, both from the very large institutional perspective. It reduces their costs, or rather, it has the potential to reduce their costs. We haven't seen a live deployment which does that yet, because as one of you guys correctly identified, it's extremely early days in the smart contract blockchain space, and it will take years, I think, to really see anything which is very effective in that role. But it is conceivable that once you have that architecture and you know how the architecture works, a blockchain is not it's not some big dinosaur. From our approach, it's like knowing how to lay out, the ideal layout for cubicles on an office floor. Once you know how to do it, it's been let out of the box and can't get put back in. So it's about empowering people to deliver these services and then empowering the institutions to be more competitive with the services, rather than saying, it's going to allow the institutions to do something they're not designed to do. I mean, like an HSBC or a Barclays is much more concerned in this instance with corporate lending or securitization, I think.
Sure. We have one question here or a comment?
So well, one issue, I fully agree with all of this, obviously, but one issue I've had with, for example, the local community using a DAO to serve a local community is who runs the blockchain? Are you saying this is a specific blockchain created for this local community, or will this run on some much bigger blockchain, like for example the Bitcoin blockchain or what have you? And that's something that specifically in the sort of small scale community context is really important, because if you run your own blockchain, then potential for abuse is huge, I would think.
Yeah, so in the case of Eris, you're running your own blockchain. Preston, did you want to answer that?
You don't have to.
But you don't have to, is that right? You can use a different blockchain.
You
Or
can do whatever you want. I mean, yeah.
You can do both. You can use your own small one and then just stamp it into the big one when you want.
So yeah, you could do something like, let's say you're running a local blockchain and you wanted to get security over the data, over the set, over the state of the data. You just regularly could check into a Bitcoin or an Ethereum or something else, and that way, every day, every 2 days, you could see that that's happening. As you change the way that the system is designed, for example, as if you put someone in charge who has a key or an M event multisig, which can change anything in the chain, yes, you need to watch that person very closely in the way that they administer that chain. However, what it allows you to do is it allows you to set up the infrastructure extremely quickly, and then it allows you to be really transparent about what whoever that person is doing. Everybody's seen Satoshi's. Everybody's seen Satoshi's coins, and he's never spent them. And if the day that he did spend them, it would be a sort of big event. This is something which people can monitor with a very, very high degree of closeness. And the idea is that if you know who is running it and you know who has the permission, the moment that they exercise that permission, they'll do so under a very, very high degree of scrutiny. You can have a script which flags up on everyone's computers. The admin just used their key, and you'd be able to see exactly what they did and how they did it, and when and even from where. So from our perspective, it's the transparency in that kind of an application which is important. And if you want the added decentralized verification, you can get it. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to structure it as a cryptocurrency, because if you're structuring it as a cryptocurrency, you get all of these problems with cryptocurrency in that you need a lot of mining or staking power to secure it. There's a very strong incentive to centralize it. And our thesis is that real-world enforcement is 99 times out of 100, if not greater than that, going to be enough for someone to toe the line and administer the database fairly, just as it is with something else. What you get from the blockchain is the ease of distributing that application out and onboarding new users, and the fact that you don't have to look over it so much, and you don't need a complex IT infrastructure in order to administer it. So yes, they're not perpetual motion machines. There are always going to be points when they plug into the real world, but you can plan for that.
So the way I understand it is that it's a sort of trusted model by default, and then if you really need that extra built-in sort of crypto trust, then you build that in as you see fit.
Yep, absolutely. If you need it, you build it in. If you need to, if it's something you need to that is worth paying for, you can pay for it, and you can check against another blockchain. And we recognize that that's important.
Species, you can have your niche chain, your small chain that is 5 of you or 10 of you, low security because and then you've got your global chains, which are far harder and higher security, and you can start to it's just like a choice of databases, and some of them you pay for, some of them you don't, and you can now start to program between them.
Yeah.
So I think I'm interested, if we go back to the original use case of doing something. So we have a not-for-profit company in education. We have a bank account. We set it up. I want to allow people to set up their own academies, very small things that pay for their hosting. So rather than, and I want them to feel that they own it and they run it and they can take the data and the domain and go their own way with it. So for me to be able to use my bank account and virtualize it and give them governance over micro budgets of a few €100 to pay their own teachers and what have you, it solves my problem as a small social enterprise. Now for the funder who funded us, they have that problem on a much bigger scale, and for councils and for auditing the projects, they want the transparency in the auditing, and there's not so much of the issue of you do with real money, of the privacy of that as well, and we don't have to use Bitcoin. We can actually use a democratic control over the accounts. That's what our application can be.
There's actually a really simple explanation or description of it, which Reddit user xCthulhu, he called it hub and spoke, which is basically that you have the distributed, or the decentralized backbone, and then when you need to use the backbone, you don't start chucking all of your data onto the backbone, but what you do is you run a private infrastructure which utilizes the automatic and transparent and cryptographically secure properties of blockchain. And then when you need to, you lean on the central blockchain if it's appropriate to do so. So it's this idea that you're going to have blockchains everywhere doing various things, and when you need that big bad, we call them big bad public chains, when you need that infrastructure, it's right there, it's still there waiting for you, and you just plug into it. So yeah, and that's all doable.
So I'm interested to know how this all comes across then. Like, if you've got this big bank, which is the product of mergers and acquisitions, what Preston is basically saying is that this technology that we have now with these blockchains allows anyone now to set up their own little micro banking institution. The analogy that Preston was using was that it's like setting up a prefabricated office with the chairs and the tables. That once you know how to do that, it's very hard to put the cat back in the bag. You now have anyone that can set up their own little bank locally and then serve their residents. I mean, is that what are your thoughts on that? Someone who comes from this.
Actually, I think that Joe, you're probably closer to this stuff within, and I think probably it's worth saying that I'm not here on behalf.
Right. Sure. No. Yes. Of course.
So anything I say is not all representative of the house view on any of this.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Fine. All right.
But,
sorry, go.
So yeah, well, I'm going at it from a technical perspective. I do think that retail banks, the traditional ones, will struggle. Some of them more than others, especially if they're not quick at innovating like some banks are. UBS is a little bit different though. Their primary business is wealth management. The banking side of it, at least the investment banking side, is really just a service for that wealth management. It's much smaller compared to other big investment banks. So in that respect, I think they'd be happy to take on some of these new technologies to help them become more efficient on that side, to better serve their wealth management, which is the main business.
Right. Okay. So there's a difference between like retail banking and like investment banking. And some of the banks, when we use this nebulous term bank, obviously we're referring to many different things. So from an investment point of view, we've talked a little bit before on previous shows and previous meetups about decentralized exchanges. That's somewhere where the blockchain can have influence in merchant banking. At the moment, you have the investors and the large scale, particularly the high frequency cheating. High frequency trading.
Naughty, not allowed. Naughty, high frequency, no.
Yeah,
no, we have to be nice. We play nice at Eris Industries.
So if you look back at the history of Wall Street, it's often a history of people that tried to get there first. They wanted to get their trades met before other people. And the most recent incarnation of this is with high frequency trading, where some traders had access to the market sooner than others, such that they could preemptively put in trades before let's say more institutional investors like pension funds, for example, would be able to get access to them. So that's somewhere where we've looked at blockchains having an impact in the past. One of the ways in which the blockchain can impact this market is by ensuring that everyone plays by the same rules, because essentially what you're doing, whether it's an Eris blockchain or one of these big scary public blockchains, is everyone has to abide by the same code. Everyone's using the open source code. Everyone can see what the rules are ahead of time. So I don't know if that's something that anyone wants to.
Well, it's something the regulators are already addressing. So there's speed brakes put on. I'm not sure exactly what exchange, but definitely Europe is legislating for having speed brakes, or you end up having trades sort of sent to the exchange in like 1 millisecond gaps rather than continuous. So one person can't get their electron in the tube ahead of another person, which is really what you're describing. And if you've read Flash Boys, and it sounds like you might have, you know that IDX set up something where there's similar sort of brakes on speed, and you don't have the issue of co-location because you actually make sure the physical cables are the same length going out of everyone's server. So I think this is something that the industry is addressing as a whole. I know a lot of banks have backed off their dark pool thing because it's gotten a lot of scrutiny, as you can imagine. So I think this is actually something that the industry is addressing by itself. And to my mind, blockchain sounds like a very radical solution for something that is actually through public relation considerations or fairness considerations and regulatory. The industry is in some instances moving away from that by itself.
Are you confident that the industry can regulate itself?
No.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ksenia.
Basically, I'm interested in why actually banks find this technology radical, unless rather than practical sort of way of exercising transparency. Because if you're thinking of anything like whether it's whether I have some contributors and let's say I'm a company who pays some freelancers and what I'm paying it from, it's kind of a black box, and I can show them that yes, if they contributed this amount of content and then they receive their payments and so on. So this kind of stuff. So I'm mainly interested in this transparency aspect, and rather than maybe complex contracts and complex automation, it just so from this perspective, it's like, why is it considered radical? Is it because of the Bitcoin?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think so. I feel it's just a marketing problem. I feel like Bitcoin has been touted as like, oh, it's the future of money, and like nobody really understands how it works, and everyone's like, whoa, this is new money that banks don't have control over and stuff like that. Where that's not really the interesting part, right? The fact that it's money, that we use it as money currently, isn't what we're advocating here at all, right? It's one use. But
yeah, because I think there is there is a little bit of this confusion, because as we're talking of blockchains and banks, we sort of think Bitcoin, and what we were talking here is transactions, but not necessarily. It can be fiat transactions reflected, or decisions over fiat transactions reflected in the blockchain as just an open database that everyone can watch, which makes it interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I just wanted a fundamental sort of legal question here. What is the difference between voting about a transaction and making a financial transaction?
I think we'll get to that second, but in the first bit, banks are basically giant data stores. They hold data. They're responsible for overseeing a lot of data. The difference between a blockchain and any other kind of database in the world is that the data actually does work for you. Whereas at the moment, the data is just a giant sunk cost. It's a fixed cost where you have to oversee it, you have to manage it, you have to secure it. The blockchain more or less secures it on its own within certain reasonable parameters. It controls what people can do in relation to it within certain reasonable parameters. If you have an admin set of keys, then obviously they're going to be able to intervene, but you're going to know that your users aren't going to be able to step in. And in addition to that, your users are constrained by the structure of the app. So one way of thinking about it is, and this is nothing new for the internet, but it is something new without a server. So in the sense that if you double spending a Bitcoin, imagine double spending a like button on Facebook. If you send a message to Facebook servers and you say, hey, I like this post, you then can't like it again. You can only like it once. And so it's like double spending a permission rather than double spending a coin. And so basically the blockchain and the automatic processing is doing this work for you, and once mining is out of the equation, it's doing it extremely cheaply. It's like Raspberry Pi type compute power is involved in verifying a transaction. So for the banks, this, I think, at least in my experience, having talked to quite a number of them, it's about reorganizing the way their relationships to their data and making the data work for them instead of having to work to manage it. And when a lot of your cost is basically management of data, this to them is a very compelling proposition. So yeah, and voting on a transaction versus instructing a transaction, how do you mean?
Oh, I was just, I've always been fascinated by the difference, because I've programmed and worked in sort of democracy and sort of cryptocurrencies. So I was just, when I'm thinking about these virtual kind of bank accounts with governance on them, and wondering about the legality or otherwise of issuing currencies versus the voting and decision by people in terms of authorizing a transaction, I was just wondering what the legal distinction between both is. I know.
Oh, okay. Like if you're voting to release funds in Bitcoin versus you roll your own current cryptocurrency, it's mushy and qualitative. In that case, law is a mushy and very, very, very. It's extremely mushy and soft discipline. Nick Szabo called it wet code, and you just sort of get the impression of like a wet rag or a limp noodle or something. when you hear it referred to like that, as against dry code, which is what the blockchain does. So law is really discretionary. It depends on what you're trying to do. Swarm, for example, backed off coin issuance, and they went with the model of, you can vote on what features you want in the Bitcoin comic, and that's what these tokens mean, instead of the tokens being valuable and being worth ownership and being securities. So it's a case-by-case thing, and it's really duck tests. So we have an existing concept. This is what it has been. We have a new technology. Does it look like a duck, walk like a duck, and does it quack? If yes on all three, then it's a duck. But if something falls down, then you go look for another appropriate analogy and you try to fit it into that box. So basically, if what it looks like on the tin, generally it is, with very few exceptions, in my experience. But that I hope that answers that particular question.
I see you've changed your title there, Preston.
Huh? High frequency marmot. Yeah, I figured that's something which is causing a lot of complaints on Twitter. They're like, I was with a bunch of the sort of crypto 2.0 original gangsters having so like Robert Sams, Richard Brown, Ian Grigg at a pub last week. Last week it was Monday. Jesus. So we were all.
Bet you drunk a lot. Most of the really important decisions in Bitcoin are made in pubs, I hear.
Actually, I had to go to the gym, so I stuck with water and Diet Coke. I was being very disciplined. So it was very boring, or depending on how you look at it. Where were we? What were we talking about?
High frequency trading.
Oh yeah, high frequency marmot. So yeah, basically there's some complaints in the crypto 2.0 scene that my use of cuddly animals on Twitter is really annoying when someone's trying to have a serious discussion. Which they'll be like, well, what about this? And I'll just be like, here's a cute animal. Like, I don't want to have this conversation over the internet.
But also, well, just bring it back to this high frequency trading thing. So I just find what you're talking about really interesting, is that a lot of the problems that you have with traditional sort of employment is that you have to go through this HR process, and often when you're hiring someone, both parties, both the one being interviewed and the one doing the interview, are incentivized to tell good things about each other. Of course, why would you lie? One of the things that the banks are very good at is sharing secrets. They make no bones about this. They're in the business, as Preston said, of storing large swaths of data and keeping that a secret so that they can trade on it ahead of other people. Okay.
No. You can't do that. No, not allowed.
Okay.
Not allowed.
All right, but one of the differences is between the open source software and the closed source software is now opens up the doors to a lot more developers, right? Now anyone can then go in and then code their own exchange, and if the Bitcoin tokens are already understood as money, as we've already said, and you can start trading them, that kind of democratizes and opens up those kind of financial platforms, no?
Absolutely, but I mean, closed source software doesn't make sense anymore. There are too many developers, there are too many people, there are too many ways to reverse engineer or something. I mean, in 1960 it might have made sense, or 1980 it might have made sense, but today you've got developers everywhere. You've got 10-year-olds, creating dark markets in 20 minutes at hackathons or something. I mean, it's going to be pervasive, and so it's like knowing math. I think. Yeah, democratizing finance is a good thing. It's going to, and think about it this way, it's going to create new ways that the banks can talk to their clients. If their clients are using open source software and the banks are using open source software, they're going to be able to communicate with each other much more effectively. There are going to be fewer disputes about who said what when. It's going to make their operations more efficient. And just because there are more people who are interested in this now than, in terms of development and a professional discipline than there were before, self-included, although I'm a pretty piss-poor developer, but at least, I can find my way around. So yeah, I think that's the direction that things are going into. People will have more direct relationships with each other that will be machine-mediated. I don't think this is a bad thing.
What is currently closed source, which could be open source? Like I said, I'm not a technical person, so could you maybe enlighten me with that?
Well, like Word versus OpenOffice is a prime example. Microsoft Word is proprietary software, which has a certain layout and where you can inspect the code and this and that. Windows is not open source. Microsoft conceals.
Yeah, so like financially, I guess we're talking about the exchanges.
Well, the exchange is something that very early in in Bitcoin's existence, people sort of copped on to the fact that if you have a central ledger that's currently provided by the exchange, the thing, and I think this touches on, sorry, I didn't catch the name of the girl remotely.
Ksenia.
Mentioned earlier why it actually is quite radical is because to replicate, you currently have the CME, for example, or like LCH, clear swaps, holding the central ledger, and to replicate, to break that system and replicate it so that everyone's maintaining it it's beyond enormous. And not to say it can't go that way eventually, but it's very robust, and there's a central entity that's highly trusted. So I don't think that's something that can easily be disrupted.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you.
Can I ask a question? As big and trusted systems were mentioned, did anyone think about, let's say, using both in kind of as a hybrid system? Because I think of it as more realistic in terms of if I have some old, just normal database or an exchange or something, and then I want to add some feature. What will be the feature that the blockchain? If I log something into the blockchain, what does it make sense, and what does it do?
That's this protocol database distinction that people keep talking about. So whenever you hear someone say Bitcoin is a protocol for money, a blockchain actually is really two things. It's a protocol and it's a history of that particular data structure running on that set of rules. So you could imagine a set of circumstances where a bunch of banks were using the same protocol, but they were using different databases. And so something like an LCH ClearNet or a securities depository or the correspondent banking system would then become quite a similar thing. It would be a consortium play, I think, by the banks if they did that. So it would just be right. These are the rules on which we communicate with each other. And when I, at HSBC, want to send someone else who's a client of UBS a transaction, I have two numbers, which is the chain ID of UBS running on this protocol, and then the public key address, which is something like a sort code and an account number. And the difference between that and what currently happens is that instead of having a central entity running a ledger, you simply have a bunch of consortia running an oracle, so a machine which can authenticate changes across those databases and send that data back and forth without necessarily needing to see what's on those databases. And so at that point, you've got an agreed framework for peer-to-peer transfers between their clients, which may still be, it is both open and closed at once, in the sense that the database is closed, but the protocol would be open, because everyone would have to see what the agreed rules are. So if someone wants to join that system, okay, well, you want to join the system? Okay, here's a new database. This is the open protocol we're using. Bank secrecy requires that we don't see the data that's on your database, and we don't see your customer information. But commercial prudence and just technical necessity requires that you know all the rules on which you can communicate with the rest of us. So what you've got there is it's like HTTP, right? So we all use the web, but we don't all store our websites on the same server. Similarly with blockchains, people could use the interbank payments protocol, but they don't need to store all of their data on a single server, or indeed on any servers but their own, in order to make that thing work. So, and they have a very good record tracking these transactions as they move through this system. Something like that is extremely ambitious. It has not yet been done. It is theoretically possible with existing technology, but no one has yet attempted it, because it's that's a 10 or 15-year project, I think, trying to get that kind of automation. This technology is what, a year old, so I think that's a very, very far off, distant project. But that's an example of how it's not a private blockchain, it's an open protocol with particular databases that use it.
So I got a question here about banking as well that I've been asked often, and I can only, from my experience, guess at answers. So people here, which is why are there no banking APIs that are openly available to customers? Is there a business reason why there isn't a single API even now? That's 15 years after kind of APIs went mainstream, or let's say at least 10 years after they went mainstream. to any bank that I can access anywhere. I've heard rumours that there's some German ones. Maybe I can.
Oh, there is.
Yes. But I mean, these are sort of like really hard, very late in the game. Is there a business reason why they don't do this, or what is the reason why there isn't one?
I have no idea. I'm sure I have no idea, to be honest with you.
This is what I was referring to about the secrecy. There is actually an academic paper called "Banks Are in the Business of Sharing Secrets," and one of the stories I was reminded of the other day was when there was this chap who was going for a promotion at a bank, and when he was interviewed and asked what banking was, he said it was all about finance and about helping people plan for the future, and he said that's the wrong answer. You're actually in the entertainment business. And it's a facetious joke by someone in banking themselves, employing another banker. It's like giving up. Now, I was in Canary Wharf the other day, and I was going up in the lift, and there were two people there. I think they worked at, I think it's Santander or somewhere like this. And he was saying, yeah, I was reading this article in Wired the other day, and it said that if your company doesn't have an open API, you go out of business within 5 months or something as a startup. And he sort of said it as if like this was new information. And obviously, somebody like us, we've been in startups for a number of years. It's almost like, why not? There was a company a few years ago that tried to do like your online banking, like Mint.com. Mint.com in the US. So it just allows you to like do all your financial planning, gets all of your credit card bills, and it tells you how much you're spending. You tell it how much you want to save, and it tells you how to achieve it.
Yeah.
But we don't have that here in the UK.
There is sorry, but off topic. There is a conference in Berlin tomorrow, which is called API Days, and I think there will be some attempts, some open banking with APIs there, so we can check and maybe cover it tomorrow from Berlin or something.
At the last Hack News meetup, there was a guy trying to. I'm not sure what stage it is. It's called Teller.io, which is
what?
Teller.io, and they basically. I have no idea how this is supposed to work or what they're actually doing, if they're just providing some wrappers to like bank websites or whatever. So they're saying, yeah, we're like creating APIs for these banks.
Yeah.
I don't see how it works.
Open banking. I mean, I've been trying to track it it's going to be like 10 years now, 12 years. I've been asking, looking, and seeking for it, and there have been various projects, like you said, the commercial ones and not-for-profit ones. And obviously, I'm really interested in.
Is it just countercultural? Is it just something in the DNA of these organisations, or is it just organisations?
If I can be play the fool, and I don't know, maybe someone might inadvertently get something from it, but when you talk about banks providing APIs, you're talking about being able to stream your personal finance data into another application. Is that specifically what you're talking about?
And make payments.
Yeah, and you can control your bank account.
Electronic banking, but there's an open API with credentials, and I should be able to create my own software, my own accounting software, use open source software, create community organizations. And there's no security problem here.
No,
I mean,
it's just
a web is just a fixed interface of so you can provide.
One of the underlying principles of the web is the separation of presentation and form. So the way the data is presented is separate to the actual content itself. So rather than using Santander's version of online banking, I could just use my own. That would be the basic idea.
I mean, the easy answer sounds like control your brand.
Right.
It's like, we want, you're with Just Eat, your example, Santander for life. You open like a student checking account. You come to us for your first mortgage, whatever else. If it's like, I have my money with some organization, I don't really care, but look, I have this cool app and it has like marmots on it or whatever.
right.
All of a sudden they don't really have that relationship with you anymore. I'm guessing.
That's good. That sounds good.
The way that banks are structured, in my experience, is that, and this is true actually, the reason that fintech is like lit a fire under everyone's ass is because everybody in the city, banks, law firms, accountants, have realized that that they actually have developer capacity, which is not just some guy running around like replacing their computer when it breaks, and that you have like systems architects and things like that, and there are technological solutions to their business, to their business issues, which they just simply aren't aware of and they haven't thought of. in the sense that the front office doesn't really think about this unless they're on some, strategic investment or some innovation team. They just don't think, if you're a bond trader, or you just don't think about what's going on in the rest of the business. You think about what you're doing in the day-to-day. And as you move up through the ranks and you eventually become, an AD and then a director and then an MD, it's not something which bothers you, and it's not something which ever had to bother you, and as far as you're concerned, it's not something which should. So, I was reading an article the other day where they referred to an application programming interface in quotation marks instead, or API, and I mean that's the phase where things are. People are just starting to get au fait with the lingo, and that's where they are. I think they'll catch up quickly, but there's a realization that was simply 10 years ago. If you talk to anyone in banking about technological innovation, when I started in the city, people would have been like, what? How is that, excuse me, I'm going to go, securitize these mortgages, BRB. So it's just not something that anybody thought of until fairly recently. It takes time.
I mean, because obviously with this community bank that we're going to set up in the next 2 weeks, just using our company's bank account and then creating these little DAOs, they're going to have APIs, so you're going to get all the kids putting marmots on their mobile phone apps to have access to the micro budget around their DAO. It'll be kind of security ring fence. They'll only have like 100 quid in that DAO. You can.
But then you've got stuff like KYC, which you have to deal with. So
all the kids need to be providing their passports and their driver's licenses.
Well, actually, it'd be their parents, because they lack capacity. So so you'd basically have to determine, who's using that bank account, who's able to remove funds from it. Customarily, if you're 15 years old, you can't withdraw funds from a bank account.
You've got no access to this bank account, though. At the moment, what they're doing is voting on whether the server's paid or this developer gets.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. But that's different, as I said.
It's sort of.
There's open budget in a sense, rather than
to the financial transactions around electronic payments for a community interest organisation. So you're not withdrawing from cash yourself, but for us, I'm quite amazed because I thought I just simply wouldn't be able to do that for exactly the reasons you were telling me. But it seems like community interest companies all around the globe could start to be using this within the next 24 hours.
If you're not fettering your discretion as a director, then yes. I mean, as long as you hold the ultimate power to do it. One thing our original prototype, which we built last June, was basically a prototype trade association. So consulting mechanism and this and that. And the question was, what happens if you send up a message to the directors of the trade body and you say, we want to do X, we want this policy to be enacted? You can't compel them to actually do it with a machine because they're people. And because the law says that if you're running a company, you ultimately the buck stops with you as the director. But what you can do is you can say, okay, well, we had a really transparent mechanism which showed what everybody thought. We put it into this voting machine, effectively. It spit out this particular result. And if you don't abide by it, you damn well better provide a good reason to explain why a vast supermajority of your community who works in this organization has told you to do something and you've totally failed to do it. And not only that, it's sitting there staring you in the face. I would think of it almost in terms of giving people more power to make demands as to how their organizations are run and how their funds are spent, than something where they're actually compelling the organization to do so. But it makes it very easy, and I mean anyone who's done like bondholder voting, where people are shareholder voting, where people are filling in ballots or showing up and then going to one of the custodian banks, and it's a pain in the ass. So here you just automate the entire process, and that private key relates to a particular person who has particular right, and when they put that in and that transaction's happened, that's it. It's happened either by them or by someone who's got the private key. So you can make that process, which would normally take 21 days plus then a meeting plus a bunch of lawyers plus something else, and you just basically have a little flag pop up on their inbox one day and say, okay, hey, by the way, there's a resolution going on in respect to this particular instrument, or Greenpeace is voting on its next constitution, or whatever mechanism you want, and you've got a very easy way to reach out to people, and they have a very easy way to reach out or slap you back.
in legal entities where there's no difference, where they're member organizations and there are no directors, there are just members, and they all have legally binding votes over these decisions. So partnerships, limited liability partnerships, LLCs, where there is no distinction between the community of members and the directors, then
you still have directors of LLPs, but they're not directors, so they're like responsible.
Yeah, they're all responsible. Yeah. But you could have 1,000 group LLP, couldn't you? The local.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And
yeah,
when they vote, then there are no directors they're all directors. So the vote and the voting decision to do the transfer is the same as the directors transferring.
True, but ultimately you need someone to sign the bit of paper. So who that person is, whether they have authority to do so under the partnership deed, those kinds of decisions, that's all going to be structured in from the beginning.
They don't need to sign a physical paper. It's the blockchain signature counts in law.
It counts. It could count for a normal, ordinary run-of-the-mill contract, not for a deed. So not for everything. Okay. So a deed you still need to physically sign with a human being. So.
Great. So I've got a question. We're coming up for an hour now.
All right. So and Switzerland has singularly failed to chime in.
So but I did have a question, and that is a practical one. How soon can we get like some prototyping done? Can we do that next Wednesday, same time, same place? Can we actually get some kind of script working? Because you have like a mining network, no, on Eris?
No, you don't need one. Okay. I mean, if you could roll your own chain today now. You could roll your chain tonight, deploy scripts as soon as you have them written and prototyped. You could just put those onto the chain. At the moment, you would have to write it in Lisp, so it's going to be a bit of a pain in the ass to do that. But soon you're going to be able to write it in Solidity, which is C-like. So this is going to be something which is more familiar to your average Joe, and that's something I wouldn't want to say when that's being delivered, but it's any time I think next 2 weeks.
But do you reckon you could get something drawn up in Lisp by next week? We can have a go at it?
Yeah, let's do it next week.
Does that sound good?
We'll have a go.
Down like a clown, Charlie Brown.
Sounds great.
Excellent. Cool. Right. Well, since Switzerland hasn't chimed in, we're ending this call without saying hello to them. But thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you for watching, everybody. And I guess we'll see you in a week or so, and hopefully we'll be able to.
Oh yeah, on Sunday we're going to be having a DO design jam actually, 6 o'clock GMT and 7 CET.
Cool.
Great.
Same
awesome.
channel.
Thanks,
so we'll bombard everybody on Twitter with all that cool stuff. But no, thank you guys for coming in person, and I'll see you guys soon.
See you, Preston.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one.